father is the late President Idi Amin. I didn't want to say what I'm going to say today, but then dodging this history is what has made my father's detractors appear as angels saving Ugandans. I saw news of President Museveni while speaking to members of parliament about the new sovereignty bill, reportedly saying that foreign interference brought the 8 years of the Amin government, adding that Britain's recognition of the Amin government just 8 days after Amin came to power shows that Britain was behind the coup. Clearly, Museveni has zero evidence to back what he is claiming here, claims that would not even stand in a court of law, basically just Radio Katwe bullshit. Where is actual evidence of Britain plotting the Amin coup or funding it or anything? Here are two other things that Museveni can't explain. First, the purge of the army by Captain Oito Ejoko Obote's orders on 23rd January 1971 at Lubiri Barracks, a day before the Amin government was announced. A purge of all non-war soldiers from the army, leading to the officers fighting back the heinous tribalism, taking the barracks that night, then taking the capital city the next morning, and ultimately the entire country on 25th when they declared a new government. If Britain was behind the coup, then was Oito Ejoko working for Britain or what? Secondly, Museveni said that he has never been ruled by Amin for even one day, that he packed his bags and left the country the moment Amin came to power. So Museveni never even knew why and how the coup happened. He might even be learning here for the first time in his life that Oito Ejoko's actions is what led soldiers to pick up arms from the armory, resist the tribalism, purge in fear of their lives, and decide to take the government in fear of Obote's return from Singapore to put them in the general court-martial for resisting tribalism. Even Amin himself was not involved. The leader of the resisting soldiers was actually Staff Sergeant Musa Yosa. He was there when Oito Ejoko arrived with a group of soldiers at the barracks and ordered everyone locked up except soldiers from Obote's ethnic group. Musa Yosa is actually the person who toppled Obote in 1971, not Amin, who was actually detained for 8 hours and forced at gunpoint to be president when Amin came to the barracks the next day on 24th to check why there had been a firefight in the barracks the whole night. Now, the one reason why Museveni's excuse for fighting Amin is ideologically empty is simple. The army toppled Milton Obote, but Obote was only president because he had undemocratically toppled the previous president, Mutesa, 5 years earlier, despotically changed the constitution. It is called the pigeonhole constitution because the male pigeonholes in the parliament is where members of parliament first saw this Obote constitution and were ordered to pass it in parliament the same day. Obote thus conducted a coup, changed the constitution, appointed himself president, banned all political parties except his own UPC, jailed all his political opponents indefinitely without trial, and ruled in a reign of terror by martial law for 5 years until he was toppled while purging the army in a fit of tribalism. Basically, Museveni doesn't see anything wrong with all this despotism against the people of Uganda. Museveni never lifted a finger to resist this heinous Obote tyranny. The only people who ultimately did something to the grand applause of the people of Uganda was the military when it toppled Obote in 1971. What all this says about Museveni is that he was okay with the Obote I dictatorship and was actually disturbed that someone had removed it, that he was still eating from that dictatorship as it was persecuting Ugandans. And when Obote was removed, disgruntled Museveni decided to go and join Obote in exile and fight Amin for 8 years to return the Obote dictatorship on Ugandans and eat again as its defense list. Tell me, is that ideology? That's how incoherent Museveni's fight against Amin actually is when you put it in its proper historical context against the Obote I dictatorship. Now, when a decade later Museveni successfully returned Obote to power, Obote restarted his tyranny exactly where the Amins had stopped it back in 1971, purging the army, tribalism, to kick out Ugandans, and the army except his ethnic group, turning the UNLA into his tribal militia. That's exactly what happened again the moment Obote returned to power. And just as the Amins were the ones on the receiving end of the tribalism in 1971, now it was Museveni who was facing the same dangerous tribalism within the UNLA and ultimately had to fight the very monster that they had brought back out of ignorant hatred of Amin. Museveni never understood that after all the tyranny that Obote had implemented in his first presidency, especially once he had used the army to forcefully remove Uganda's independence president, that was the original unforgivable sin that started Uganda's problems, and that alone meant that Obote himself should go. But instead, Museveni, in all the glory of his cluelessness, went and brought the monster back on Ugandans for a second tyrannical presidency, which turned out to be the darkest chapter ever in the history of Uganda, particularly the Luero genocide, where the victims' skulls were even used to decorate the roadsides of Uganda. The night killings of Ugandans by UNLA henchmen, after which a bus would go around the city collecting the dead bodies before dawn when Ugandans woke up. All the innocent people arrested and interrogated by unruly UNLA soldiers at Nile Hotel, now Serena, and then brutally tortured, murdered, then buried in mass graves in the compound and at Namave Forest. One of the mass graves at Serena being dug up as recently as 2003. In stark contrast, when they say Amin murdered 500,000 people, nobody can show any evidence of a victim. In fact, when a Daily Monitor research tried to check the evidence of the accusation, the researcher found nothing. After reading this, I myself wrote to Amnesty International, the human rights organization that had made the accusation against my father, and I asked them if they could provide any evidence of their claim. Just a list of reported incidents, location of those incidents, dates of the incidents, and number of people killed per incident, so that we can tally against news reports and see where Amnesty International's numbers actually came from. To this day, all I have received from them is the sound of crickets and an occasional frog. Complete silence. It's all bullshit Zionist disinformation campaign using a foreign human rights organization. Where is the list from where they tallied their numbers? Nowhere. They just cooked the accusation from thin air, told Amnesty to write it in their human rights report, then they ordered BBC presenters to read it as breaking news. Manipulation. I want to ask Museveni if he has ever apologized to Ugandans for bringing back Obote after Amin had toppled the tyrant and Museveni found himself having to fight the same Obote in the 1980s, 10 years later. And how many Ugandans did Museveni murder during his ideologically bankrupt 8-year fight against Amin? Were you happily shooting butterflies with toy guns or murdering innocent Ugandans with actual guns, grenades and assault rifles during those 8 years? How many Ugandans did you kill then? And how many have you murdered in your entire life so far, including in your brutal fight against Obote? And please explain to the people of Uganda what you were caught doing at House 49 Maluku Housing Estate on January 22nd, 1973, especially the hit list of the names of Ugandans whom you were preparing to murder when you were found arriving in a Volkswagen Beetle whose number UU171 had been reported to police by eyewitnesses 4 months earlier in the abduction of Chief Justice Penkioni. You being the same person who leaked to the Amin government the whereabouts of the weapon that Obote had sent to General Lumumba, and you were said to have leaked the information out of disgruntlement because Obote had originally promised to send those weapons to you, only for you to discover that Obote had sent them to his tribesmate, General Lumumba, instead. Talking of the late Chief Justice Penkioni, do you know that this is the person whom the Amin government was preparing to hand power to as part of Amin's promise to give Uganda back to civilian rule and return to the barracks, as Amin had publicly declared in 1972? But you instead abducted Penkioni, never to be seen alive again, and you guys were found conducting a campaign of terror in the country on Obote's behalf, leading to the elders of Kigezi starting a national petition saying they would rather have Amin as life president than see a return to tyrant Obote, a despot whose misrule Museveni was completely comfortable with, despite all the political ills which should have served as red flags to the horrors that will come to pass in the Obote II government, where Ugandans could be heard every day crying, Uganda Food Day, Kastakatunda Jaharishwe, loosely meaning Uganda is dead but God will not forsake us. In fact, the phrase was so rampant that it had become the new greeting whenever two Ugandans met. By the time Ugandans were crying using their tragic new good morning greeting, President Idi Amin was in Saudi Arabia, living a quiet and pious life as a devout Muslim until his passing. That new Ugandan greeting alone tells you the disturbing failed state status of the country, thanks to the vandals who came to power after my father. You don't need anything else to help you compare or understand the animals that the Tanzanian forces helped bring to power in Uganda in 1979. A simple phrase by ordinary Ugandans, but it said a lot about how Amin developed the country, what kind of economy he actually left to Ugandans, and what the ensuing regimes did to all of it. It's all contained in the phrase, Uganda Food Day, Uganda is dead. Meanwhile, I noticed that Museveni doesn't exist in his own right. It's as if he only exists if he talks about Amin, and that his 40 years in power shows that he's only sharp at clinging to power thanks to talking about Amin. From changing the constitution to extending the presidential terms when he had reached his last term, then changing the constitution again years later to remove age limits when he had reached the constitutional age, basically some unscrupulous scammer who is clinging by hook or crook just to sleep at State House by talking about Amin, claiming to fight for Uganda's sovereignty while giving away the health data of all Ugandans to unknown foreign entities, even taking bribes in exchange for oil contracts with American entrepreneur Patrick Ho. And now Museveni cannot travel to the US. The American Department of Justice might put him in a cell for corruption next to Maduro. That's why for the last 10 years, since 2016, Museveni is a fountain of shame who has only been able to attend the annual UN General Assembly of World Leaders in New York via Zoom. If everything I have said here is a lie, let him attend the next summit in September for God and my country.